2 Chronicles 1. Solomon had just stepped up as king, and the first thing he did was make sure he was locked in with God. He gathered up all the leaders, commanders, judges, and family heads, because he knew this wasn't just about him. It was about leading the whole nation right. So he went up to Gibeon, where the old-school tabernacle from Moses' time was still set up. That's where they kept the bronze altar that Bezalel had made back in the day. Solomon pulled up and offered 1,000 burnt sacrifices to God. He wasn't holding back. That same night, God came to Solomon in a dream and said, "Tell me what you want, and I'll give it to you." Solomon didn't ask for money, power, or revenge on his enemies. He said, "God, you made me king, but I'm young and I don't know everything. This nation is huge, and I need wisdom and knowledge to lead them right." God was feeling that answer. He said, "Because you asked for wisdom instead of chasing riches, clout, or long life, I got you. I'm giving you wisdom, and I'll throw in wealth, honor, and success like no king before or after you." So Solomon leveled up. He ruled over Israel with wisdom, stacked up gold and silver like they were common as rocks, and had top-tier chariots and horses brought in from Egypt. His kingdom was thriving because he put God first. 2 Chronicles 2. Solomon knew he had a major assignment, building God's temple, and he wasn't about to do it halfway. This had to be next level, fit for the Most High. He put together a whole workforce, 153,600 men. Some were carrying heavy loads, some were cutting stone, and others were overseeing the work. He wasn't just building any old structure. This was God's house, so everything had to be on point. Then Solomon hit up King Hiram of Tyre, the same dude who had helped his father David. He sent him a message saying, "Look, I'm building a temple for my God. He's too great to be put in any building. But this temple is going to be a place for us to worship and offer sacrifices. I need the best materials, cedar, juniper, and algum wood from Lebanon. And I need skilled workers, especially someone who knows how to work with gold, silver, bronze, and fine fabrics. In return, I'll make sure your people are well taken care of." Hiram was hyped when he got the message. He replied, "Man, your God really did his thing making you king. I got you. I'm sending Huram-Abi, a master craftsman who can work with all kinds of materials. Plus, I'll make sure you get all the timber you need from Lebanon." So Solomon's crew and Hiram's crew got to work, cutting the wood and preparing everything for the temple's construction. This wasn't just a building project. This was a mission to create a space where God's presence would dwell among his people. 2 Chronicles 3. Solomon finally started building the temple, and he didn't just pick any random spot. He built it on Mount Moriah. That's the same place where God tested Abraham and where David built an altar to stop a plague. This was sacred ground, and now it was about to be the place where God's presence would dwell. The temple was massive, 90 feet long, 30 feet wide, and built with precision. But Solomon didn't stop at size. He went all out with the details. He covered the inside with pure gold. Walls, ceiling, doors, everything. He even used 23 tons of gold for the most holy place alone. Inside the most holy place, he set up 2 huge cherubim, 15 feet tall with wings stretched out, touching each other and the walls. These weren't just decorations. They symbolized God's glory covering the temple. At the entrance of the temple, he placed 2 bronze pillars and named them Jachin and Boaz. Jachin means God establishes, and Boaz means in him is strength. These pillars weren't just for looks. They were a reminder that God was holding everything together. Everything in the temple had a purpose. There were intricate carvings, palm trees, and precious stones, all crafted with excellence. Solomon wasn't just building a temple. He was creating a space that reflected the greatness of God. 2 Chronicles 4. Solomon kept building, making sure every detail in the temple was next level. He designed a massive bronze altar for sacrifices and a giant water tank called the sea, where the priests would wash before handling sacred duties. The sea wasn't just big, it was huge. 15 feet wide, 7.5 feet deep, holding thousands of gallons of water. It rested on 12 bronze oxen, 3 facing each direction, symbolizing strength and God's provision for all of Israel. He also made 10 gold lampstands, 5 on each side of the temple, constantly shining light. There were 10 gold tables for the special bread and golden bowls for offerings. Everything had a purpose, and everything was made with excellence. Solomon brought in a master craftsman named Huram-Abi to handle all the metalwork. The man was skilled, and it showed. He created massive bronze pillars with intricate pomegranate designs, decorative chains, and all kinds of detailed carvings. Once everything was finished, Solomon placed all the sacred items inside: gold utensils, the altar, and the temple furniture. This wasn't just a building. It was a masterpiece, made to honor God at the highest level. 2 Chronicles 5. With the temple finally complete, Solomon brought in everything his father David had set aside, gold, silver, and all the sacred items, and placed them in the temple's treasuries. Now it was time for the most important part, bringing in the Ark of the Covenant, the very symbol of God's presence. Solomon gathered all the elders, priests, and Levites from across Israel. They carried the ark with care, just like God commanded back in Moses' time. Along with the ark, they brought all the sacred furnishings from the old tabernacle, making sure everything was in place. When they placed the ark inside the most holy place, under the wings of the massive cherubim, the energy in the room shifted. The cherubim stretched their wings over the ark, covering it as a sign of God's divine protection. Inside the ark were the stone tablets, the same ones Moses brought down from Mount Sinai when God made his covenant with Israel. Then came the worship. The Levites, dressed in clean white linen, stood ready with cymbals, harps, and lyres. 120 priests blew trumpets, and the singers lifted their voices in unison, praising God with everything they had. The whole temple echoed with one powerful declaration: "He is good. His love endures forever." At that moment, something incredible happened. God's presence filled the temple like a thick cloud. The glory of the Lord was so overwhelming that the priests couldn't even stand to minister. This was God's way of showing up, letting everyone know he was pleased, and that this temple would be his dwelling place among his people. 2 Chronicles 6. After the temple was filled with God's presence, Solomon stepped up in front of everybody, lifted his hands, and said, "Y'all see this? God kept his word. He told my pops, David, that his family would run this kingdom, and now here I am, standing in the temple he let me build for him." Then Solomon got down on his knees, stretched his hands toward heaven, and started praying hard. "God, you're the realest. Ain't nobody like you. You stay solid and always keep your word. You promised my father David this kingdom, and now you've made it happen. I just ask that you keep looking out for us and watching over this temple, hearing us when we pray. If we mess up, and let's be real, we will, but then we come back humble, asking for forgiveness. Please hear us and make things right. If enemies pull up on us and got us down bad, but we turn to you, step in and help us. If we hit a drought, famine, or sickness and we call on you, come through with the healing and provision. And it's not just about us. If somebody who ain't even from here hears about how great you are and comes to pray at this temple, answer them too. Let the whole world know you're the one true God." Now I know how people are. We gon' slip up. If we wild out so bad that we end up exiled in another country, but then we wake up, realize we were wrong, and cry out to you, "Please forgive us and bring us back home. We belong to you." When Solomon finished praying, he stood up, turned to the people and said, "Y'all see how good God is? Stay solid, walk in his ways, and follow what he told us. This temple ain't just a fancy building. It's our direct line to God. Don't take it for granted." 2 Chronicles 7. As soon as Solomon finished praying, fire came down from heaven and burned up the offerings on the altar. God's glory filled the temple so strong that the priests couldn't even step inside. The people saw the fire, felt God's presence, and dropped to the ground worshiping, saying, "The Lord is good. His love lasts forever." Then Solomon and the people went all in, offering sacrifices and celebrating for days. Solomon sacrificed 22,000 cattle and 120,000 sheep to dedicate the temple. The priests took their places, the Levites brought out their instruments, and the whole nation worshipped with music and praise. For 7 days straight, Israel celebrated, turning up in honor of God. Then on the 8th day, Solomon sent everybody home, and they left joyful and grateful, knowing God had blessed them. God speaks to Solomon. Later that night, God pulled up on Solomon and said, "I've heard your prayer, and I've chosen this temple as my spot. When I shut the sky and there's no rain, when locusts come through wrecking the crops, or when sickness spreads through the land. Pay attention. If my people, the ones called by my name, humble themselves, pray, seek me, and turn from their wicked ways, I'll hear them. I'll forgive their sins and heal their land." God continued, "I'll always have my eyes on this place. As long as you and your people walk with me like your father David did, your kingdom will stay strong. But if y'all turn away, start chasing other gods, and forget me, I'll shut it all down. This temple, this kingdom, everything will fall apart, and people will look at it like, 'Man, what happened here?' And they'll know it's because my people turned their backs on me." God made it clear. Stay faithful, and the blessings will flow. Turn away, and the consequences will follow. 2 Chronicles 8. After 20 years of hard work, building both the Lord's temple and his own palace, Solomon kept expanding his kingdom. He rebuilt cities, put Israelites in charge, and made sure everything was running smoothly. Handling business. Solomon took some of the towns King Hiram of Tyre had given him and turned them into thriving cities where his people could live. He also went out and conquered new territories, making sure Israel stayed strong. He built storehouses, chariot cities, and military outposts. Solomon was securing the kingdom on all sides. The Israelites didn't have to do the hard labor, though. Solomon put the leftover Canaanite tribes, the ones Israel hadn't completely driven out, to work. They handled the labor while the Israelites were placed in leadership, running the military, government, and other key positions. Keeping worship first. Even with all his success, Solomon never forgot about the temple. He made sure sacrifices were offered every single day, just like Moses had commanded. He followed the set schedule for burnt offerings, Sabbaths, new moons, and festivals. Solomon also put priests and Levites in their proper positions, making sure temple duties and worship stayed on point. He didn't cut corners. He ran everything exactly how his father David had set it up. Power moves on the sea. Solomon wasn't just handling business on land, he got into the shipping game too. He partnered with King Hiram of Tyre, and their crews sailed out to Ophir, bringing back tons of gold to add to Israel's wealth. Solomon was making major moves, securing the kingdom, keeping worship in order, and expanding Israel's influence. Everything he touched was flourishing because he was walking in the wisdom and favor God had given him. 2 Chronicles 9. The queen pulls up. Word had spread far and wide about Solomon, his wisdom, wealth, and how God was blessing him. The Queen of Sheba had to see for herself, so she pulled up to Jerusalem with a whole squad, bringing camels loaded with spices, gold, and jewels. She hit Solomon with every tough question she could think of, but he had an answer for everything. Nothing stumped him. When she saw the palace, the food on his table, the way his officials carried themselves, the way his servants were dressed, and how everything ran so smoothly, she was speechless. She said, "I heard the rumors, but this is on another level. They didn't even tell me the half of it. Your wisdom, your wealth, God really put you in this position. He must love your people a lot to bless them with a king like you." Then she dropped off gifts, over 4 tons of gold, more spices than anyone had ever seen, and fine jewels. In return, Solomon blessed her with whatever she asked for, and she left amazed by everything she had seen. Solomon stays stacking. Solomon's wealth was out of this world. Every year he was bringing in 25 tons of gold, not even counting what traders and kings from other nations sent him. He made 200 massive gold shields and 300 smaller ones, all covered in pure gold. He set them up in his palace, which itself was on another level. His throne, made of ivory and overlaid with gold. It had 6 steps, 12 lion statues on the sides, and nothing like it had ever been seen before. Silver? That was so common in Jerusalem that people treated it like rocks. Everything Solomon touched turned into gold, literally. Solomon's global influence. Kings from all over the world came to hear Solomon's wisdom because they knew God had given him something special. Every year they brought gifts: gold, silver, robes, weapons, spices, horses, and mules. Solomon had so many chariots and horses that he built entire cities just to store them. He imported the best horses straight from Egypt and had them shipped all over the region. The end of Solomon's reign. Solomon ruled for 40 years, and when he passed, he was buried in Jerusalem with his father David. His son Rehoboam took over as king. Solomon had it all: wisdom, wealth, and power, because he walked in God's favor. But as we'll see, his son won't have it so easy. 2 Chronicles 10. Rehoboam fumbles the bag. After Solomon passed, his son Rehoboam stepped up as king. The people of Israel weren't just about to accept him without a conversation, though. Jeroboam, a former official who had beef with Solomon and had been hiding out in Egypt, came back and led the people to speak with the new king. They told Rehoboam, "Look, your father Solomon had us working hard. If you ease up on us, we'll serve you no problem." Rehoboam told them to give him 3 days to think about it. Good advice versus bad advice. First, Rehoboam went to the elders, the OGs who had advised Solomon. They told him straight up, "If you serve these people, speak kindly to them and ease their burden, they'll be loyal to you forever." But Rehoboam didn't like that answer, so instead of listening, he went to his young crew, the dudes he grew up with. They told him, "Man, don't let them punk you. Show them who's boss. Tell them, if you thought my father was tough, I'm gonna be even worse. My little finger is thicker than his waist. He hit you with whips, I'm coming with scorpions." Rehoboam liked that answer better. The kingdom splits. 3 days later, the people came back for his decision. Rehoboam ignored the elders' wisdom and went full dictator mode, telling them, "If you thought my father was tough, get ready, because I'm turning up the pressure." That was the last straw. Israel wasn't having it. They revolted on the spot, saying, "Forget this. We ain't got no part in David's house anymore. Everybody go back home." Rehoboam sent out Adoniram, the official in charge of forced labor, to try and calm things down, but the people stoned him to death. Rehoboam had to run back to Jerusalem ASAP before they got to him too. From that day on, the kingdom was split. Only Judah and Benjamin stayed loyal to Rehoboam, while the rest of Israel followed Jeroboam as their new king. Morale of the story: Rehoboam had a chance to lead with wisdom, but his ego and bad advice cost him everything. When you don't listen to wise counsel, you set yourself up for failure. 2 Chronicles 11. Rehoboam prepares for war, but God says nah. After Israel broke away, Rehoboam was heated. He pulled up to Jerusalem and put together an army, 180,000 warriors, ready to go to war against the northern tribes and take the kingdom back. But before he could make a move, God sent a prophet named Shemaiah with a message. Tell Rehoboam and all of Judah, don't fight your brothers. This split is part of my plan. Go home. Rehoboam actually listened for once and called off the war. Locking down Judah. Since he couldn't go after Israel, Rehoboam focused on securing Judah and Benjamin. He built up 15 fortified cities, stocked them with food, weapons, and soldiers, making sure his kingdom was well protected. The priests and Levites switched sides. Meanwhile, up north, Jeroboam was wilding out. He didn't want the people of Israel going to Jerusalem to worship at God's temple, so he made golden calves and set up fake altars, leading the people into idol worship. Because of this, the priests and Levites left Israel and moved to Judah, staying loyal to God's temple and true worship. But it wasn't just them. A lot of regular people from every tribe who still feared God packed up and moved to Judah, choosing to follow the Lord instead of Jeroboam's mess. Rehoboam gets strong, for now. For the first 3 years, Rehoboam stayed solid. He followed the ways of David and Solomon, and his kingdom was stable. He even married well, taking multiple wives, including one of David's granddaughters, and having 28 sons and 60 daughters. He set up his sons in different cities, making sure they had power, wealth, and plenty of wives to keep their families strong. But as we'll see, Rehoboam's good streak wouldn't last long. 2 Chronicles 12. Rehoboam falls off. For the first few years, Rehoboam was holding it down, following God's ways. But once his kingdom got strong and comfortable, he and the people of Judah got careless and turned their backs on God. So, in Rehoboam's 5th year as king, God let Shishak, the king of Egypt, pull up on Judah. He came through with a massive army, 1,200 chariots, 60,000 horsemen, and countless troops from Egypt, Libya, and Ethiopia. Shishak stormed into Judah and took over all the fortified cities. He was coming straight for Jerusalem. God's warning and Judah's humility. At this point, the prophet Shemaiah stepped up and told Rehoboam and his officials, "This is happening because y'all abandoned God. So now, he's letting you get a taste of what it's like without him." That shook Rehoboam and his leaders. They humbled themselves and said, "You're right. The Lord is just." Because they repented, God told Shemaiah, "Since they humbled themselves, I won't wipe them out completely. I'll let them be conquered, but not destroyed. They're about to learn the difference between serving me and serving these foreign kings." Shishak takes the gold. So instead of destroying Judah, Shishak took everything valuable from the palace and the temple, including the gold shields Solomon had made. To replace them, Rehoboam had to settle for bronze shields, a clear downgrade. Every time the king went to the temple, his guards would bring out the bronze shields like they were still something special. But everyone knew they had lost the real treasure. The aftermath. Because Rehoboam humbled himself, God didn't let Judah completely fall apart. Things weren't great, but they weren't as bad as they could have been. Rehoboam ruled for 17 years, but his leadership was shaky. He never fully committed to following God. When he passed, his son Abijah took the throne. Lesson learned. Rehoboam's story is a reminder. When you forget God, expect to take losses. Judah went from gold to bronze because they got comfortable and stopped depending on him. But when they humbled themselves, God showed mercy. 2 Chronicles 13. Abijah versus Jeroboam, the battle for Israel. When Abijah took the throne in Judah, Jeroboam was still ruling over Israel. From the jump, there was tension between the two kingdoms. Eventually, it led to war. and Jeroboam thought he had the upper hand. Jeroboam rolled up with 800,000 warriors, while Abijah only had 400,000. Israel had them outnumbered 2-1. Abijah's speech. We got God on our side. Before the battle even started, Abijah stood on a mountain and called out to Jeroboam's army. Listen up, Israel. Y'all know that God gave this kingdom to David's family forever. But Jeroboam, he was just one of my father's old officials who rebelled. And now y'all are following him instead of following God. Look at what you've done. Y'all kicked out the real priests of God and replaced them with fake ones just like the other nations do. You out here worshiping golden calves while we, in Judah, are still serving the one true God. Our priests still serve at God's temple. We still offer sacrifices like we're supposed to, and we still seek him daily. So yeah, you might have the numbers, but we got God, and with him on our side, you don't stand a chance. The sneak attack and God's power. While Abijah was giving his speech, Jeroboam was setting up an ambush, sending troops behind Judah's army to trap them. Judah was surrounded from the front and the back, but instead of panicking, Judah called out to God. The priests blew their trumpets, and the army let out a battle cry. And then God stepped in. Judah's smaller army started crushing Israel's forces. Jeroboam's army panicked, broke formation, and started running, but they couldn't escape. Judah killed 500,000 of them that day. Jeroboam, he never recovered from that ill. God struck him down and he died not long after. Meanwhile, Abijah got stronger and took over several cities. The takeaway. Abijah wasn't perfect, but he knew where his strength came from. Even when they were outnumbered and surrounded, Judah put their trust in God, and he showed up big time. 2 Chronicles 14. King Asa brings peace to Judah. After Abijah passed, his son Asa took over as king of Judah, and unlike his father and grandfather, Asa actually did right by God. He got rid of all the idol worship, tore down pagan altars, smashed the sacred poles, and told the people, we need to seek the Lord and follow his ways. Because of this, God gave Judah peace for years. With no wars to worry about, Asa took advantage of the time and built up Judah's cities, fortified the walls, and strengthened the army. By the time he was done, Judah had 300,000 warriors from Judah and 280,000 from Benjamin, all fully armed and ready for battle. Judah versus the Ethiopian army. After 10 years of peace, a major threat pulled up. Zerah the Ethiopian came at Judah with 1 million soldiers and 300 chariots. Asa's army was big, but it wasn't that big. They were outnumbered nearly 2-1. But instead of freaking out, Asa turned to God and prayed, Lord, you got this. It doesn't matter if we have a big army or not. You're the real power here. We're relying on you, so don't let these enemies win against you. God comes through again. As soon as the battle started, God stepped in and wrecked the Ethiopian army. They panicked, started running, and Judah chased them down, wiping them out completely. Judah took so much loot from the enemy camps that they left the battlefield way richer than they came. They also raided surrounding cities because God put fear in their enemies, making sure nobody dared to fight them again. The takeaway. Asa's story shows that when you put God first and rely on him, he'll give you peace and victory, even when the odds are stacked against you. Judah went from enjoying rest to facing an impossible battle, but because Asa trusted God, they walked away with a win and a blessing. 2 Chronicles 15. Azariah delivers a message. After Asa's big victory, God sent the prophet Azariah to give him a word. Listen up, Asa. As long as you stay with God, he'll stay with you. But if you turn your back on him, he'll let you go your own way. Look at Israel's history. Whenever they forgot God, they struggled. There was chaos, war, and confusion. But whenever they turned back to him, he rescued them. So be strong, don't quit, and God will bless your efforts. Asa cleans house. Hearing this fired Asa up. He doubled down on his mission. He got rid of every remaining idol in Judah and Benjamin, even going into some captured Israelite towns to tear down pagan altars. He also repaired the altar of the Lord in front of the temple, making sure Judah stayed focused on true worship. A nationwide revival. People from Israel, especially from Ephraim, Manasseh, and Simeon, saw how God was blessing Asa. So they left their homes and moved to Judah to be where God's presence was strong. Seeing all these people turn back to God, Asa called a huge assembly. The whole nation came together in Jerusalem, offering 700 cattle and 7,000 sheep to God as a sign of their renewed commitment. Then they made a bold covenant, saying, "We will seek the Lord with all our heart and soul. Anybody who refuses to follow him is done." They celebrated with joy and music, knowing God was pleased with them. And because they stayed faithful, God gave them peace on all sides. Asa stays loyal, even against his own family. Asa was so serious about keeping Judah right that he even removed his own grandmother, Maacah, from her position as queen mother because she had built an idol. He tore her idol down and burned it to make an example. Even though Asa didn't remove every pagan shrine, his heart stayed fully committed to God his entire life. Because of that, Judah remained safe and at peace for many years. The takeaway. Asa's story shows that when you go all in for God, he goes all in for you. Judah had peace, prosperity, and protection, not because they were the strongest nation, but because they put God first. 2 Chronicles 16. Asa slips up. For most of his reign, Asa had been locked in with God. But in his 36th year as king, he made a critical mistake. King Baasha of Israel rolled up and blocked the roads leading into Judah, basically setting up a siege. Instead of going to God like he did before, Asa went into his own bag and paid off King Ben-Hadad of Aram, Syria, with silver and gold from the temple to attack Israel. It worked. Ben-Hadad hit Israel's cities, and Baasha backed off. On the surface, Asa's plan looked like a strategic W, but spiritually, it was a major L. God sends a warning. Not long after, the prophet Hanani came to Asa with a message. "Bro, why didn't you trust God like you did before? Remember when you were outnumbered against the Ethiopians and he had your back? But now, you put your faith in a human king instead of the Lord. Because of this, you just missed out on an even bigger victory. If you had trusted God, he would have handled everything for you. The Lord is always watching, looking for those whose hearts are fully committed to him. But this was foolish. Now you're going to have constant wars." Asa gets salty. Instead of repenting, Asa got mad. He threw the prophet in prison and even started oppressing some of his own people. His heart was changing, and not in a good way. Asa's final years. A few years later, Asa got hit with a severe disease in his feet, but even then, instead of calling on God for help, he only relied on doctors. He died 2 years later, after ruling for 41 years. The people still honored him with a grand funeral, but his final years were a reminder of how dangerous it is to forget where your help comes from. The takeaway. Asa started strong but got comfortable and stopped trusting God. No matter how much success you have, never get so confident in yourself that you stop depending on him. 2 Chronicles 17. Jehoshaphat takes over and locks in with God. After Asa passed, his son Jehoshaphat stepped up as king of Judah. But unlike his father's later years, Jehoshaphat was locked in with God from the start. He didn't follow the mess happening in Israel under their corrupt kings. He stayed faithful to God, walking in his ways. Because of this, God established his kingdom, and Judah became strong and secure. The people saw how blessed he was and brought him gifts, gold, silver, and wealth. His reputation was growing, and so was his influence. Cleaning up the nation. Jehoshaphat wanted to make sure Judah stayed right with God, so he removed the idols and pagan shrines that some people were still clinging to. Then he did something no other king had done. He sent out officials, Levites, and priests to teach the people God's laws. They went city to city, making sure everyone knew how to follow God. Fear of Judah spreads. Because Jehoshaphat and Judah were moving with God, nobody wanted smoke with them. Other nations feared Judah because they could see God was covering them. Even the Philistines, who were usually enemies, started bringing gifts and tribute. Arabian leaders brought thousands of rams and goats as a peace offering. Jehoshaphat's army grew crazy strong, over 1.1 million trained warriors, plus fortified cities for extra protection. The takeaway. Jehoshaphat's success wasn't about military power. It was about staying faithful to God. When you walk right, God establishes you, protects you, and makes sure even your enemies respect you. 2 Chronicles 18, Jehoshaphat gets caught up. Even though Jehoshaphat was solid with God, he made one bad move. He formed an alliance with King Ahab of Israel by marrying into his family. And Ahab? He was one of the most wicked kings Israel ever had. Ahab wants war. Jehoshaphat wants a word from God. A few years later, Jehoshaphat went to visit Ahab in Samaria. Ahab threw a big feast and then hit him with, "Yo, help me take back Ramoth-Gilead from the Arameans." Jehoshaphat, trying to be loyal, said, "I got you. We're one people. But before we do this, let's ask God what he says." Ahab called 400 prophets, and they all said, "Go for it. God will give you the victory." But something didn't sit right with Jehoshaphat. He asked, "Is there a real prophet of the Lord we can ask?" Ahab sighed and said, "Yeah, there's this dude Micaiah, but I hate him. He never prophesies anything good about me." Jehoshaphat was like, "Come on, man, don't say that. Let's hear him out." Micaiah's prophecy. The truth hurts. So they sent for Micaiah, and the messenger warned him, "Look, everybody else told the king he'll win. Just go with the flow." Micaiah showed up and sarcastically said, "Oh yeah, go ahead, king. You'll definitely win." Ahab wasn't fooled. "Stop playing and tell me the truth." Then Micaiah got serious. "I saw Israel scattered like sheep with no shepherd. If you go into battle, you're not coming back." Ahab turned to Jehoshaphat and said, "See? I told you he always brings bad news." Then Micaiah dropped another bomb. God had allowed a lying spirit to influence Ahab's prophets because Ahab was already set on doing what he wanted. Ahab, furious, threw Micaiah in prison and said, "Feed him bread and water until I get back." Micaiah replied, "If you come back, then God didn't speak through me. Watch and see." The battle. Ahab's sneaky plan fails. Ahab was shook but still stubborn. He told Jehoshaphat to wear his royal robes while he disguised himself as a regular soldier. The Aramean king had told his men, "Forget everybody else, just kill Ahab." So when they saw Jehoshaphat in royal robes, they chased him down. Jehoshaphat cried out to God, and God saved him, making the soldiers realize he wasn't Ahab. Meanwhile, Ahab thought he was safe in disguise, but a random arrow hit him right between the armor plates. He bled out in his chariot, and just like Micaiah said, Israel's army scattered, leaderless. The takeaway. Jehoshaphat was a good king, but aligning with the wrong people almost cost him his life. Ahab thought he could outsmart God, but his fate was sealed the moment he ignored the truth. 2 Chronicles 19. Jehoshaphat gets back on track. After barely escaping with his life in that messy battle with Ahab, Jehoshaphat made it back home to Jerusalem. But before he could settle in, God sent a prophet, Jehu, to check him. Jehoshaphat gets called out. Jehu came up to him and said, "What were you thinking? Helping a wicked king like Ahab? Aligning yourself with someone who hates God? That was reckless. But because your heart is still seeking God, He's not going to destroy you. But don't make that mistake again." Jehoshaphat took the rebuke seriously. Instead of getting defensive, he humbled himself and got back to doing what was right, bringing Judah back to God. Jehoshaphat traveled all through Judah, making sure the people turned back to God. He reminded them, "We have the Lord. Why are we out here chasing idols? Seek Him and stay faithful." He also set up solid judges in every city and gave them one simple but powerful rule. Judge fairly. Don't take bribes. Don't be out here ruling based on who's rich or powerful. You don't answer to men. You answer to God. In Jerusalem, he appointed Levites and priests as higher judges to handle bigger cases, and he told them, "Always be honest and move with integrity. If a case comes up where people are beefing over bloodshed, laws, or commands, handle it carefully so you don't bring guilt on the nation. Act courageously and God will have your back." The takeaway: Jehoshaphat messed up by linking with Ahab, but when God corrected him, he took it to heart and got back on track. He didn't just change personally. He made sure Judah as a whole stayed in alignment with God. Lesson: when you mess up, don't stay down. Repent, learn from it, and move forward the right way. 2 Chronicles 20. Jehoshaphat's unstoppable faith. A huge enemy army pulls up. Not long after Jehoshaphat got Judah back on track, trouble came knocking. A massive army made up of the Moabites, Ammonites, and Meunites rolled up to attack Judah. Jehoshaphat got word that this army was already on the way, and he knew Judah couldn't win this fight on their own. But instead of panicking, he turned straight to God. Judah seeks God first. Jehoshaphat called for a national fast, and all of Judah gathered to seek the Lord. He stood before the people and prayed, "God, you rule over everything. Nobody can stand against you. You gave us this land and we built this temple in your name. You told us that when trouble comes, whether war, famine, or disease, we should seek you and you would save us. Now look, these nations are coming to take what you gave us. We don't have the strength to fight them, but our eyes are on you. We're relying on you to handle this." God's answer: the battle ain't yours. While the people stood before God, His Spirit came upon Jahaziel, a Levite, and he prophesied, "Listen up, Judah. This battle ain't yours, it's God's. You won't even have to fight. Just go out tomorrow, take your positions, and watch the Lord handle it." Jehoshaphat and all the people bowed down in worship, thanking God for the victory before it even happened. The Levites stood up and began praising God loudly right then and there. Praising before the battle. Early the next morning they went out as God commanded, but instead of putting the warriors up front, Jehoshaphat put the worshipers first. The singers marched ahead of the army, praising God. "Give thanks to the Lord. His love endures forever." And as soon as they started worshiping, God caused the enemy armies to turn on each other. The Ammonites and Moabites attacked the Meunites, then they all turned on themselves. By the time Judah arrived, every single enemy was already dead. From fear to favor. Instead of fighting, Judah spent 3 days gathering all the loot: gold, silver, weapons, and supplies. They took so much that they couldn't even carry it all. On the 4th day, they gathered to praise God again, renaming the battlefield the Valley of Blessing because of how God came through. When they returned to Jerusalem, they had a full-on praise parade, worshiping with harps, lyres, and trumpets all the way to the temple. Because of this, no one dared to mess with Judah again. The surrounding nations heard how God fought for them, and peace came over the land. The takeaway: Jehoshaphat knew he couldn't win this fight on his own, so he put full trust in God, and God handled it. The lesson: when you face a battle you can't win, don't panic. Seek God first, worship before the victory, and let Him fight for you. 2 Chronicles 21. Jehoram wrecks his own kingdom. Jehoram takes over and starts wilding. After Jehoshaphat passed, his son Jehoram became king, but instead of following in his father's footsteps, he turned straight to wickedness. First thing he did, he killed all his brothers to eliminate any threats to his throne. Then he married Ahab's daughter, bad move, and started following the evil ways of Israel, leading Judah into idol worship. He completely turned his back on God, but God didn't wipe him out, for the sake of His promise to David. Enemies start applying pressure. Since Jehoram abandoned God, God started letting his enemies rise up. The Edomites revolted, broke free from Judah, and crowned their own king. The Philistines and Arabians raided Judah, looted the palace, and even took Jehoram's wives and sons, leaving only his youngest son behind. God sends a warning through Elijah. At some point, Elijah the prophet, the same one who dealt with Ahab, sent Jehoram a letter straight from God. You ain't nothing like your father, Jehoshaphat, or your grandfather, Asa. Instead, you're moving like Ahab and leading Judah into sin. Because of this, judgment is coming. Your enemies will wipe out your family and your kingdom, and you're about to catch a disease that'll take you out slow and painfully. Jehoram's painful end. Not long after, Jehoram got hit with a severe intestinal disease. His insides literally started failing. It got worse over 2 years, and eventually, he died in agony. The people were so over him that they didn't even mourn. He didn't get a royal funeral like his ancestors. They buried him, but not in the tombs of the kings. The takeaway: Jehoram turned his back on God, and his whole kingdom fell apart because of it. He lost his family, his power, his health, and even his legacy. His life is a reminder that rejecting God doesn't just affect you, it affects everyone around you. 2 Chronicles 22. Ahaziah's short and messy reign. Ahaziah takes the throne. After Jehoram died a painful and humiliating death, his youngest son Ahaziah became king of Judah. But his reign, it was doomed from the start. He was only 22 years old. He followed the wicked ways of Ahab's family because his mother Athaliah, Ahab's daughter, was running the show behind the scenes. He listened to the wrong people, taking advice from Ahab's crew instead of seeking God. Because of this, he walked straight into destruction. Ahaziah joins the wrong fight. Ahaziah linked up with his uncle, King Joram of Israel, Ahab's son, and together they went to war against the Arameans. Joram got wounded in battle, so Ahaziah went to check on him in Jezreel. That was a bad move, because at that exact time, God was raising up Jehu to wipe out Ahab's entire bloodline. Jehu's judgment and Ahaziah's death. Jehu was on a mission from God to clean up Israel, and when he found Joram and Ahaziah together, he took action. He killed Joram on the spot and threw his body in the field that once belonged to Naboth, a reminder of how Ahab and Jezebel had stolen it. Ahaziah tried to run, but Jehu's men caught up to him in Samaria, wounded him, and he died shortly after. His body was taken back to Jerusalem and buried with his ancestors, only because he was a descendant of King Jehoshaphat who had once followed God. Athaliah goes full villain mode. When Ahaziah's mother, Athaliah, found out her son was dead, she snapped. She killed off the rest of the royal family, trying to wipe out anyone who could take the throne. She took over as queen, ruling Judah herself like a ruthless tyrant, but one baby survived, Ahaziah's son Joash, because his aunt Jehoshabeth, a daughter of Jehoram, hid him in the temple for 6 years. The takeaway. Ahaziah's downfall came because he surrounded himself with the wrong people. He followed Ahab's wicked ways, took bad advice, and walked straight into destruction. Meanwhile, Athaliah's greed and wickedness set the stage for Judah's darkest moment, but God was already working on a plan to bring restoration. 2 Chronicles 23. The comeback. Joash becomes king. The plan to overthrow Athaliah. For 6 years, Queen Athaliah ruled Judah with an iron fist after killing off the royal family. But what she didn't know was that one heir had survived, Joash. Joash had been secretly raised in the temple by Jehoiada, the high priest, and his wife Jehoshabeth, who was King Ahaziah's sister. Now, it was time to take Judah back. Jehoiada put together a carefully planned rebellion. 1. He gathered the commanders, Levites, and key leaders from across Judah, bringing them into the temple. 2. He revealed Joash, the true king, who had been hidden all this time. 3. He made them swear an oath to protect Joash and restore him to the throne. 4. He set up a security detail, stationing guards at every key location. Then, in a powerful moment, they crowned Joash, gave him a copy of God's law, anointed him as king, and shouted, "Long live the king." Athaliah gets taken out. Athaliah heard the noise and ran to the temple, furious. When she saw Joash crowned as king and the people celebrating, she screamed, "Treason! Treason!" But Jehoiada wasn't having it. He ordered the guards, "Take her out, but don't kill her in the temple." They dragged her to the horse gate of the palace, and that's where she was executed. Cleansing Judah. With Athaliah gone, Jehoiada made a covenant with the people and God. They would serve the Lord once again. Then they went straight to work. They tore down Baal's temple, smashed the idols, and killed Matan, Baal's priest, on the spot. They restored proper worship at the temple, putting priests and Levites back in their rightful positions. They led Joash to the royal palace, sat him on the throne, and declared Judah back in order. And just like that, Judah was at peace, and the wicked reign of Athaliah was finally over. The takeaway. For years it looked like evil had won, but God always has a remnant and a plan for restoration. Even when things seem hopeless, God can flip the script in an instant. 2 Chronicles 24. Joash starts strong but falls off. Joash's good years under Jehoiada. Joash became king of Judah at just 7 years old, and as long as Jehoiada the priest was alive, he did what was right. One of his first major moves, restoring the temple. Over the years, Athaliah's people had trashed God's house, using its treasures for Baal worship. Joash called the priests and Levites and told them, "Go collect money from the people so we can fix the temple." At first, the Levites dragged their feet, so Joash set up a donation chest at the temple entrance, and the people gave joyfully. The money poured in, and they hired workers to repair and restore everything. When the work was finished, they even had extra money to make new gold and silver utensils for worship. As long as Jehoiada was guiding him, Joash kept Judah on the right track. Jehoiada dies and Joash falls off. Jehoiada lived to 130 years old before passing. After he died, everything changed. The leaders of Judah came to Joash, and instead of standing firm, he let them pull him into idol worship. They abandoned God and went back to worshiping Asherah, poles, and idols. disrespecting everything Jehoiada had worked to restore. God sent prophets to warn them, but Joash wouldn't listen. Joash turns against Jehoiada's own son. Then came the ultimate betrayal. Jehoiada's son, Zechariah, filled with the Spirit of God, stood up and said, "Since you've abandoned God, He's abandoned you." Instead of repenting, Joash ordered Zechariah to be stoned to death in the very temple they had restored. As Zechariah was dying, he cried out, "May the Lord see this and bring justice." Judgment comes for Joash. That same year, the Arameans invaded Judah with a small army, but because Judah had turned from God, he let them win. The Arameans wrecked Judah, took treasures from the palace, and left Joash severely wounded. His own officials, angry about what he did to Zechariah, plotted against him and assassinated him in his bed. They didn't even bury him in the royal tombs. The takeaway: Joash started strong, but his faith was dependent on Jehoiada, not on God. The moment his mentor was gone, he folded. Lesson: don't just rely on people to keep you on the right path. Build your own relationship with God so your faith doesn't fall apart when they're not around. 2 Chronicles 25. Amaziah. Half-hearted loyalty leads to a hard fall. Amaziah starts off right, kind of. After Joash was assassinated, his son Amaziah took the throne at 25 years old. At first, he did what was right in God's eyes, but not with his whole heart. His first move: handling justice. He executed the officials who killed his father, but he didn't kill their children, because God's law said only those guilty should be punished, not their families. This showed that he had some respect for God's law, but his commitment wasn't solid. Amaziah's big mistake: hiring the wrong soldiers. Amaziah decided to go to war against Edom. He built up a 300,000-man army from Judah, but he didn't think that was enough. So he hired 100,000 mercenaries from Israel for 7,500 pounds of silver. Bad move. A prophet came to him and said, "King, don't mess with Israel's troops. God is not with them. If you take them into battle, you will lose, no matter how strong you think you are. God can give you victory without them." Amaziah hesitated and said, "But what about all the silver I already paid them?" The prophet answered, "Don't worry about the money. God can give you way more than that." So Amaziah listened, sent the Israelite troops home, and went to war with just his own men. Victory in battle, but foolishness follows. Amaziah led Judah to a huge win over Edom. They crushed their army and took over a key city called Selah. But then he did something dumb. Instead of giving thanks to God, he brought back the Edomite idols and started worshiping them. A prophet called him out, saying, "Why are you worshiping the gods of a nation you just defeated? Clearly they couldn't even save their own people." Amaziah snapped and said, "Who asked for your advice? Stay in your lane before you get hurt." The prophet shook his head and said, "All right, you don't want to listen? Just know God is about to bring you down." Amaziah picks a fight he can't win. Feeling himself after the Edom victory, Amaziah sent a message to King Jehoash of Israel. "Let's meet face to face." Translation: "Let's go to war." Jehoash laughed and sent back a message full of disrespect. "Listen, man, a little thorn bush thought it was as big as a cedar tree and wanted to flex. Then a wild animal came through and crushed it. You just beat Edom, and now you think you're a warrior? Stay in your lane before you get embarrassed." Amaziah ignored the warning and went to war anyway. It was a disaster. Judah got wrecked. Israel captured Amaziah and took him back to Jerusalem. They tore down 600 feet of Jerusalem's walls, leaving the city defenseless. They looted the temple and the palace, taking gold, silver, and treasures. They took hostages and left Judah humiliated. The fall of Amaziah. After being released, Amaziah lived another 15 years, but his people had lost all respect for him. Eventually, his own men turned against him, hunted him down in Lachish, and killed him. They brought his body back to Jerusalem, but his reign ended in disgrace. The takeaway. Amaziah only followed God halfway, and it cost him everything. He listened when it was convenient, sending Israel's troops home. But he ignored God when it came to his own desires, worshiping idols and picking dumb fights. Lesson: half-hearted faith will only get you halfway before you fall. Either trust God all the way or prepare for a downfall. 2 Chronicles 26. Uzziah. From greatness to tragedy. Uzziah starts strong. After Amaziah was killed, his 16-year-old son Uzziah was crowned king. Despite his young age, he ruled for 52 years, and for most of that time, he did what was right in God's eyes. He sought God early on, and as long as he stayed focused on God, he prospered. He had a spiritual mentor, Zechariah, who taught him to fear God. Because of his obedience, God gave him success in everything he did. Uzziah becomes a military and economic powerhouse. Under his leadership, Judah thrived like never before. He crushed Judah's enemies, defeating the Philistines, the Arabs, and the Munites. The Ammonites paid tribute to him, meaning even other nations respected his power. He fortified Jerusalem, building massive walls and defensive towers to protect the city. He dug wells and built farmlands, making sure Judah had plenty of food. He developed advanced weapons, including catapults and arrow launchers mounted on towers, way ahead of his time. Because of all this, his fame spread far and wide. Uzziah wasn't just a king, he was a legend. Success goes to his head. Everything was going great, until pride got the best of him. One day, Uzziah decided he was powerful enough to step into the temple and burn incense on the altar, something only priests were allowed to do. Azariah the high priest and 80 other priests rushed in and confronted him. "King, this ain't your job. God set this duty apart for the priests. Leave before you bring judgment on yourself." Instead of humbling himself, Uzziah got angry and started arguing with them. But right then and there, God struck him with leprosy. It appeared on his forehead, and as soon as the priests saw it, they rushed him out of the temple. Even Uzziah himself knew it was over. He ran out in shame. Uzziah's sad ending. From that moment on, Uzziah was a leper until the day he died. He had to live in isolation because of his condition. His son Jotham had to take over the kingdom and rule in his place. When Uzziah died, they buried him near, but not with, the other kings because of his disease. The takeaway. Uzziah had one of the most successful reigns in Judah's history, but pride destroyed him. Lesson: no matter how powerful, talented, or successful you get, never think you're too big to obey God. Pride can make you forget who gave you the blessing in the first place, and when that happens, the fall is always hard. 2 Chronicles 27. Jotham, the king who stayed in his lane. Jotham rules right. After his father Uzziah spent his final years isolated with leprosy, his son Jotham stepped up as king at 25 years old. Unlike some of the kings before him, Jotham stayed faithful to God his entire reign. He did what was right in God's eyes. He learned from his father's mistake. He ruled well, but he never tried to overstep into the priest's role. Because of this, God blessed him and strengthened his kingdom. Building and military wins. Jotham wasn't just a good king, he was a builder and a warrior too. He strengthened Jerusalem, building the upper gate of the temple and reinforcing city walls. He built cities, forts, and defensive towers, making sure Judah was protected. He went to war with the Ammonites and completely dominated them. They were so shaken that they had to pay Judah tribute for 3 years straight, 100 talents of silver, plus massive amounts of wheat and barley. A quiet but powerful legacy. Jotham ruled for 16 years, and because he walked with God, he became strong and respected. When he died, he was buried with the other kings, and his son Ahaz took the throne. The takeaway: Jotham didn't have a dramatic reign, but he stayed faithful, stayed in his lane, and prospered because of it. Lesson: you don't have to chase clout or overstep your purpose. Just be faithful, move wisely, and let God elevate you. 2 Chronicles 28. Ahaz, the king who took Judah off the deep end. Ahaz turns his back on God. After Jotham passed, his son Ahaz became king at 20 years old, but instead of following his father's example, he went completely off the rails. He worshipped idols like crazy, bringing in every false god he could. He built pagan altars everywhere, on hills, under trees, in every corner of Judah. Worst of all, he sacrificed his own sons in fire, fully embracing the sick practices of the surrounding nations. Because of this, God removed his protection, and Ahaz started catching L's left and right. Judah gets attacked from all sides. King Rezin of Aram, Syria, and King Pekah of Israel attacked Judah and crushed them. 120,000 soldiers in Judah were killed in one day, including Ahaz's own top officials. Israel even captured 200,000 women and children from Judah and took them as slaves. But then a prophet named Oded stepped in and warned Israel, "Y'all might have won, but don't think you can enslave your own brothers. God let you win because Judah was wicked, but if you take these people as slaves, he'll turn his anger on you." Surprisingly, some of the Israelite leaders listened, and they released the captives, clothed them, fed them, and sent them back home. Ahaz still won't listen. Instead of turning to God for help, Ahaz got even worse. He asked the king of Assyria for help, basically selling out Judah for military protection. Assyria took his money but didn't help. Instead, they turned on Judah and attacked them too. The Philistines and Edomites also invaded and took over cities. Ahaz was losing on every front, but instead of repenting, he doubled down on idol worship. He looted God's temple, shut its doors, and set up pagan altars everywhere. He completely abandoned God, leading Judah into deep spiritual destruction. Ahaz's miserable end. Ahaz reigned for 16 years, and when he died, Judah was in ruins. He was so hated that they didn't even bury him in the tombs of the kings. His son Hezekiah took over, and Judah was in desperate need of a comeback. The takeaway: Ahaz's life is a warning. Rejecting God doesn't just affect you, it affects an entire nation. He put his trust in the wrong things, led his people into destruction, and died a disgrace. Lesson: when things fall apart, don't run further from God. Run back to him. 2 Chronicles 29. Hezekiah brings Judah back to God. Hezekiah steps up and starts fixing things. After his father Ahaz wrecked Judah, his son Hezekiah became king at 25 years old. Unlike his father, he was serious about following God. The very first thing he did, he reopened the temple. His first year, first month as king, he went straight to the temple doors and repaired them, undoing what Ahaz had destroyed. He called together the priests and Levites and said, "Listen up. Our ancestors messed up bad. They abandoned God, shut down his temple, and brought judgment on us. Now it's on us to fix it. were bringing God back. Cleansing the temple. The Levites got to work. They cleaned out years of filth, idols, and neglect from the temple. It took them 16 days to restore it and bring everything back into alignment with God's commands. When they were done, they reported to Hezekiah, "The temple is ready. Everything unclean is gone." Worship and sacrifices are restored. Hezekiah wasted no time. He gathered the leaders and offered sacrifices to purify Judah. 7 bulls, 7 rams, 7 lambs, and 7 goats, symbolizing a full cleansing. He brought back the Levites with their instruments, just like King David had set up. As the sacrifices were made, the Levites played music and sang praises to God, and the whole nation joined in. When everything was complete, Hezekiah and the people worshipped and rejoiced. He told them, "Now that we've rededicated the temple, bring your personal offerings to God." And the people showed up big. They brought so many burnt offerings, 70 bulls, 100 rams, and 200 lambs, that they couldn't handle them all. The priests were overwhelmed, so the Levites had to help process the sacrifices. By the time they finished, Judah was fully back in alignment with God, and Hezekiah had successfully restored worship. The takeaway. Hezekiah didn't waste time. He saw Judah was a mess and took action immediately. He reopened the temple, led by example, and brought the people back to God. Lesson? If things are broken in your life, don't wait. Start fixing them now. Make room for God, and He'll restore what was lost. 2 Chronicles 30. Hezekiah throws the biggest Passover celebration ever. Hezekiah invites all of Israel and Judah to worship. After restoring the temple, Hezekiah wasn't done. He wanted to bring the whole nation back to God. He sent out messengers across Judah and Israel, inviting everyone to come to Jerusalem for Passover. This was a big deal because the Passover hadn't been celebrated properly in a long time. Even though Israel and Judah were divided, Hezekiah wanted all of God's people to unite in worship. Mixed reactions from the people. Some people in Ephraim, Manasseh, and Zebulun, northern Israel, laughed at the invitation and mocked the messengers. But not everyone ignored it. Some Israelites humbled themselves and came to Jerusalem. Plus, the people of Judah responded with enthusiasm. Because God was moving, people came together to worship. A Passover like no other. A massive crowd filled Jerusalem, and the first thing they did? Tear down every last idol and pagan altar they could find. Passover officially began, but many people hadn't purified themselves properly. Instead of disqualifying them, Hezekiah prayed for them, saying, "Lord, you see their hearts. Forgive them and accept their worship." God heard Hezekiah's prayer and healed the people. The whole celebration was so powerful and joyful that they extended it for another week. Revival hits the nation. People worshipped, sang praises, and offered sacrifices with their whole hearts. The priests and Levites, who had been slacking before, stepped up and started serving again. God's presence was so strong that Judah was filled with joy like never before. By the time the Passover ended, the people left with their faith restored, their hearts full, and their nation back on track with God. The takeaway. Hezekiah didn't just fix the temple, he brought the people back to true worship. Even when some mocked, he kept moving forward and God honored his faithfulness. Lesson: revival starts with one step of faith. Even if some people doubt or laugh, stay focused. God will bless those who seek Him. 2 Chronicles 31. Hezekiah keeps the revival going, smashing idols and cleaning up the nation. After the huge Passover celebration, the people didn't just go home and forget about God. They were fired up. As they returned to their towns, they tore down every last idol. Asherah pole, shrine, and altar dedicated to false gods. They didn't just do it in Judah. They went into Ephraim and Manasseh, northern Israel, and cleansed those areas too. After that, they went back home, but their hearts were changed, restoring the priests and Levites. With the temple fully restored, Hezekiah made sure the priests and Levites were taken care of so they could focus on their duties. He organized them into their proper roles, just like David had set up back in the day. The king gave from his own wealth to provide for the daily sacrifices and offerings. Then he commanded the people, "Bring your tithes and offerings so God's house can stay in order." And the people showed up big, overflowing blessings. The people gave so much that there were massive heaps of offerings piled up in the temple. When Hezekiah saw all this, he asked the priests, "Where did all this come from?" The high priest answered, "Ever since the people started giving again, the Lord has blessed them so much that we have more than enough." Organizing the blessings. With all this abundance, Hezekiah made sure everything was handled right. He set up storerooms in the temple to hold all the extra tithes and offerings. He appointed trusted officials to distribute food, supplies, and resources fairly to the priests, Levites, and their families. Everyone, from the oldest priest to the youngest servant, got their fair share. Hezekiah's faithfulness. Hezekiah didn't just talk about serving God. He backed it up with action. He made sure everything in Judah was done according to God's law. He sought God with his whole heart in everything he did, and because of that, he prospered. The takeaway. Hezekiah didn't stop at just a one-time revival. He made sure Judah stayed on the right path, and because the people put God first, he blessed them beyond measure. Lesson: when you honor God with what you have, he'll pour out blessings you won't even have room to contain. 2 Chronicles 32. Hezekiah's greatest test and God's victory. Sennacherib threatens Judah. After all the good Hezekiah had done, Judah's biggest enemy pulled up. King Sennacherib of Assyria. He attacked Judah and started taking over cities, eventually surrounding Jerusalem. But Hezekiah didn't panic. He got straight to work. Blocked off water sources so Assyria couldn't use them. Reinforced Jerusalem's walls and built new towers. Made more weapons and shields to prepare for battle. Then he gathered the people and said, "Don't be afraid of Assyria's army. They may have numbers, but we have something greater. The Lord our God. He will fight for us." Hearing this, the people gained confidence. Sennacherib tries to shake their faith. Sennacherib wasn't just trying to win physically. He wanted to break Judah spiritually. He sent messengers to mock God in front of the people. "Do y'all really think your God can save you? No other nation's gods have saved them from me." He even wrote letters talking trash about God, saying Hezekiah was lying to them. His men stood outside the walls, shouting in Hebrew to scare the people, saying, "Your God won't help you. Just surrender now." Hezekiah and Isaiah call on God. Instead of letting fear take over, Hezekiah and the prophet Isaiah hit their knees and cried out to God. And God responded immediately. That night, God sent an angel into the Assyrian camp. 185,000 soldiers were wiped out, just like that. Sennacherib ran back home in shame, and when he got there, his own sons killed him. Just like Hezekiah said, God fought for them. Hezekiah's pride check. After this, Hezekiah became rich and powerful, and God blessed him with wealth, treasures, and honor. But for a moment, he got caught up in his success and became prideful. Because of this, God allowed trouble to come his way to test him. But Hezekiah realized his mistake, humbled himself, and repented. So God's judgment didn't fall on Judah during his lifetime. The end of Hezekiah's reign. Hezekiah ruled for 29 years and was known as one of Judah's greatest kings. When he died, the people honored him greatly, and his son Manasseh took the throne. The takeaway. Even when enemies try to intimidate you, trust that God is bigger. Hezekiah stood firm in faith, and God handled the battle. Lesson? When pressure comes, don't fold. Pray. Let God fight for you. 2 Chronicles 33. Manasseh's wild ride, from wicked king to redemption. Manasseh starts off as the worst king ever. After Hezekiah, his son Manasseh became king at 12 years old, and he completely flipped Judah in the wrong direction. He rebuilt all the idol altars his father tore down. He set up Baal worship again, even putting Asherah poles inside the temple of the Lord. He worshipped the sun, moon, and stars instead of God. He sacrificed his own children in fire. He practiced witchcraft, sorcery, and consulted demons. Manasseh was so wicked that he outdid the nations God had destroyed before Israel. And the worst part, he led the people of Judah to do the same. God's warning and Manasseh's capture. God sent prophets to warn Manasseh and the people, but they ignored every single message. So God let the Assyrian army roll up on them. They captured Manasseh and put him in chains. They dragged him to Babylon with a hook in his nose, humiliating him in front of everyone. In his suffering, Manasseh finally realized he had messed up. Manasseh's shocking redemption. Sitting in a Babylonian prison, Manasseh humbled himself and cried out to God. And God, he heard him. God had mercy and let him return to Jerusalem. Manasseh completely changed his ways and tried to fix what he broke. Manasseh tries to clean up his mess. Once he was back in power, he started undoing all the evil he had done. He tore down the pagan altars and removed all the idols. He repaired the Lord's altar and commanded Judah to worship only God. He fortified Jerusalem and strengthened Judah's defenses. Even though some people still clung to idol worship, Manasseh had truly repented and changed his ways. The end of Manasseh's story. He ruled for 55 years, the longest of any king in Judah, and when he died, his son Ammon took over. But his story proves one thing: God's mercy is greater than our worst mistakes. The takeaway. Manasseh was one of the most wicked kings ever, yet when he humbled himself, God forgave him. Lesson: no matter how far you've fallen, it's never too late to turn back to God. 2 Chronicles 34. Josiah, the young king who brought Judah back to God. Josiah becomes king at 8 years old. After his father Ammon was assassinated, his 8-year-old son Josiah became king. Unlike his father and grandfather, Josiah was different. He followed God from a young age. By the time he was 16, he started seeking God seriously. By age 20, he launched a nationwide cleanup, tearing down every idol, altar, and pagan shrine in sight. He didn't just stop in Judah. He went into Israel's territories and destroyed every trace of false worship. Restoring the temple. By the time Josiah was 26, he decided to restore the temple, just like Hezekiah did. He ordered workers to repair and clean up God's house. While cleaning, they found something shocking: the book of the law, probably Deuteronomy, which had been lost for years. Josiah hears the word and repents. When Shaphan the scribe read the book to Josiah, he tore his clothes in distress. He realized Judah had been living in sin for generations and was under God's judgment. He told his officials, "Go seek the Lord. What does this mean for us?" They went to Huldah the prophetess, and she gave them a direct word from God. Judah is in serious trouble. Because they abandoned me and followed idols, destruction is coming. But because Josiah humbled himself and repented, God will spare him from seeing that judgment. Josiah leads a revival. Josiah didn't waste any time. He gathered all the people, from the greatest to the least, and read God's word to them. Then he made a national covenant before God. We will follow the Lord and obey his commands with all our heart and soul. The people stood with him and committed to follow God. Josiah cleared out every idol, shrine, and false practice left in Judah. As long as he lived, Judah remained faithful to God. The takeaway: Josiah didn't just talk about change, he took action. Even though Judah was on borrowed time, his faithfulness brought revival and delayed God's judgment. Lesson: when you hear the truth, don't ignore it. Act on it. A real leader doesn't just follow the crowd, they set the standard. 2 Chronicles 35, Josiah's greatest Passover and his tragic end. Josiah hosts the most epic Passover ever. After restoring the temple and bringing Judah back to God, Josiah organized a Passover like no other. He commanded everyone to celebrate it properly, just like it was written in God's law. He personally donated 30,000 sheep and goats and 3,000 bulls so that everyone could participate. The priests and Levites got back in position, handling the sacrifices just like in the days of David and Solomon. The celebration was so massive that no Passover like it had been seen since the days of Samuel the prophet. Because of Josiah's leadership, the whole nation came together in worship. Josiah's bad move, meddling in a war he wasn't called to. After all the good he had done, Josiah made one fatal mistake. King Necho of Egypt was marching to war against another nation, passing through Judah's land. Josiah, thinking this was his battle, rode out with his army to confront Necho. Necho warned him, saying, "This isn't your fight. I'm on a mission from God. Don't interfere or you'll be destroyed." But Josiah ignored the warning and disguised himself for battle. Josiah's tragic death. Even though he tried to blend in, Josiah got hit by enemy archers. Wounded and barely alive, his men took him back to Jerusalem. He died shortly after, and all of Judah mourned him deeply. The prophet Jeremiah even wrote a lament for him, showing how respected Josiah was. The end of an era. Josiah was the last great king of Judah before everything fell apart. After his death, his son Jehoahaz became king, but Judah wouldn't see another leader like Josiah. The takeaway: Josiah was a faithful and powerful leader, but his biggest mistake was stepping into a fight that wasn't his. Lesson: not every battle is yours to fight. When God gives a warning, listen, no matter how strong you think you are. 2 Chronicles 36, the fall of Judah. Jehoahaz, 3-month reign, taken by Egypt. After Josiah's death, his son Jehoahaz became king at 23 years old. He ruled for only 3 months before King Necho of Egypt captured him, took him to Egypt, and put his brother Jehoiakim on the throne instead. Necho taxed Judah heavily, forcing them to pay tribute. Jehoiakim, 11-year reign, taken by Babylon. Jehoiakim did evil in God's sight, ignoring everything his father Josiah stood for. King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon invaded Judah, captured Jehoiakim, and took him as a prisoner. Nebuchadnezzar looted the temple and took sacred treasures to Babylon. He put Jehoiakim's son Jehoiachin on the throne. Jehoiachin, 3-month reign, taken by Babylon again. Jehoiachin ruled for only 3 months, but he was just as wicked as his father. Nebuchadnezzar returned, captured him, and took him to Babylon. He took more treasures from the temple and exiled the best and brightest people of Judah. Nebuchadnezzar placed Zedekiah, Jehoiachin's uncle, as king. Zedekiah, 11-year reign, the final king of Judah. Zedekiah was hard-headed and rebellious, refusing to listen to Jeremiah the prophet or submit to Babylon as God had commanded. He ignored God's warnings and led Judah deeper into sin. The priests and leaders became completely corrupt, disrespecting God's temple and his commands. God's warnings rejected. Judgment falls. God kept sending prophets to warn Judah, telling them to repent. But they mocked God's messengers and refused to listen. Finally, God had enough. Babylon destroys Jerusalem, 586 BC. Nebuchadnezzar's army invaded Jerusalem, burned down the temple, tore down the walls, and destroyed the city completely. They killed many people, and those who survived were taken as slaves to Babylon. The land of Judah was left empty and desolate, just as God had warned. Hope in exile, the Persian king's decree. Even though Judah was wiped out, God's plan wasn't over. After 70 years, Babylon fell to King Cyrus of Persia. Cyrus issued a decree saying, "God has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he has commanded me to rebuild his temple in Jerusalem. Anyone who wants to return and help, go." This set the stage for Judah's return and the rebuilding of the temple under Ezra and Nehemiah. The takeaway: Judah ignored God's warnings for too long, and they paid the price. But even in judgment, God had a plan for restoration. Lesson: God is patient, but disobedience has consequences. Still, no matter how bad things get, his promises never fail.